Hey, John Gilroy here. Malicious actors are using AI to attack the federal government. Today, we look at AI powered threat detection. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. Our guest in the virtual studio today is Levi Gundert. He is Chief Security and Intelligence Officer at Recorded Future. Levi, how are you?
I'm great, John. It's great to be here on the program.
Hey, if you're at a trade show and you see a booth and you see Recorded Future, what the heck is that? The past, the future? Is it a publishing service or what the heck it is? And I wanted to bring Levi in maybe to convey to our audience what they do, what they don't do. And I think this whole idea of AI attack and AI defend and preemptive attack and proactive attack and defense, it's a cat and mouse game. It's a whack-a-mole game more than anything, isn't it, Levi?
It is. It is. So, we do threat intelligence. That's what Recorded Future is. And I love our name, but it's something of, a play on words, of course, and trying to predict the future, which is always dangerous. But at its core, what we do is threat intelligence.
If you go online, there's all kinds of videos about how to lose weight. They tell you to do this or eat grapefruit or do that. And then many people don't do any action at all. They don't lose weight. And I think the same can be true with threat detection. Okay, we got a threat here. Now what? So how do you go from data to decision?
Yeah, so there's really two very important points with threat intelligence. So number one, good threat intelligence is going to improve your security, and that generally happens through different forms of automation. But the other thing that threat intelligence does that's really important is it really provides a decision advantage for those in positions of power and responsibility that have to make decisions, about where they spend their budget on security, but also, how they brief others at the executive layer on, what is signal, what is noise, what matters, and how they should be preparing and thinking about various, I would say, risks, right? Because at the end of the day, the threat space is large. We all know that. We live in it. But for any organization, there's a smaller piece of that represents risk at any given time. And so both of those outcomes are actually really important if you're going to see good ROI from threat intelligence.
Years ago, the mantra was garbage in, garbage out. And I think today with AI, that is being revivified. And people are talking about, if you have partial information, if you have data fragmentation, if you can't reach a certain data set because of classification barriers. So how do you overcome that in this highly restricted federal world?
Yeah, that's 100% true. And the thing about, AI and its sort of current form and implementation that I'm constantly reminded of is really just velocity. To your point, adversarial activity has taken on, a whole new velocity. And really that's the opportunity for defenders is to match that same velocity. Because I think it's this amazing opportunity that defenders have to use, current instantiations of AI to really level the playing field. Because I think, in the past, so much of this has been an asymmetric problem where the defenders were always on the back foot. And I think this is really an opportunity to match a lot of that same velocity now. And obviously, you can't, there's a balance here and you want to be forward leaning in terms of developing those workflows. But of course, we also have to figure out how we do it with some guardrails, right? Because there's obviously cautionary examples of AI gone wild and some bad outcomes, right? So we need to figure out how we do both.
Well, I'm going to talk about the 500-pound elephant in the room, and that's Mythos. And that made big headline news in the last couple of weeks. I would guess if you go to the 7-Eleven and grab the third person walking out the door, they're going to have heard about Mythos. Oh, it's the end of the world and what's going to happen. So let's put this in perspective, maybe define it and see how it's in perspective with the federal government. So no one gets all flipped out about this. I'm sure not.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. I don't subscribe to the doomerism. I think it's another model in a long line of models. I think, there's been wonderful marketing around this particular model and its release. I think they've been wildly successful, probably beyond anything they could have imagined in this particular release. and they've done a great job there, and hats off to them for that. But I do think it's just another model in a long line of models. And again, coming back to the velocity point, it's very good, right, at vulnerability discovery. And I also think that you can achieve the same result with other models. So I don't think that this is a hair on fire moment. I think, it's really an opportunity again for defenders to think through how they build workflows and hopefully some agentic workflows to really maximize, identifying and remediating vulnerabilities, especially from an external attack surface perspective. And I think, that's really the opportunity. And again, it's any model, right? There's a lot of models out there that can accomplish the same objective. So I think we just need to keep that in mind in this conversation, that it's not about mythos. It's really just about how we build defender capabilities that match the capabilities that are available to attackers now.
Do you think it's a watershed moment?
I do think that it is a moment in time that is going to see a surge of new vulnerabilities, but I expect that when we sort of move past this moment, I do think we'll move into something that is a little bit more stable and maintainable. I think we're going to see a short-term spike, in these vulnerabilities, hardware vulnerabilities, software vulnerabilities. But I think, there's going to be great efforts at accelerating remediation and, figuring out, the patches, the workarounds for these. And then I think it will largely go back to, somewhat of a business as usual. And again, using the agentic capabilities on both sides. But I don't think we're going to, as an industry, continue to exist in this, state of heightened awareness because of a single model. There will be another model next month, next quarter, that will again sort of improve capabilities in these specific areas, and we just need to be ready for that.
When everyone here has played around with AI, and we all know that, and it's amazing how fast it can do things. We know it's fast and it does things in real time. We all know that. Now, trying to combine that with legacy systems, the federal government, of course, is full with legacy systems, and they may not have APIs that are designed to work and interact with API. So my question is, so how can you do threat detection in an environment where you may have the fastest car in the West, but you have a dirt road? So what do you do when you have these fast, quick tools that you can do threat detection with, but the data you're using are maybe not formatted properly, or maybe some of it's undiscovered?
Yeah. So again, I think, having great external attack surface intelligence really becomes important. And again, I think, the threat intelligence here helps build the business case for investing in areas like attack surface intelligence. And when you think about sort of how you're going to remediate some of these findings, I think there's a lot of CISOs out there who have been making the case that it's time to, upgrade systems. And oftentimes that means moving off of legacy systems or legacy operating systems or, what have you. And there's never really been an appetite, from the larger organization or the business to do that. And I think the positive here that this really does build a stronger business case for why it needs to be now, right? And this may have been, projects that are being kicked down the road. There is an urgency now, and there are a lot of these vulnerabilities that you're not going to be able to patch or work around. You're going to need to wholesale upgrade things, and this is going to help drive the business case for that.
I see bottlenecks. I talked about the legacy bottleneck and talked about speed and intelligence. So what about accreditation and compliance? I mean, could this be a bottleneck for getting record future approach approved, or do you work well with the normal compliance situations in the federal government?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of mandates for threat intelligence across the compliance landscape. And, depending on the compliance framework or regime we're talking about, I think pretty much all of them now incorporate threat intelligence and different aspects of threat intelligence. And it's interesting when you think about sort of the risk impacts to an organization. I sort of talk about this. There's five sort of fundamental risk impacts, and one of them is operational disruption. One of them is legal or compliance failures.
Yeah, yeah.
Another one would be brand impairment. So there's different types of risk impacts to a business, but I find that the one that actually motivates action tends to really be the legal and compliance failure.
Yeah.
There's just so much time and effort that goes into it because it becomes a fundamental imperative to operate, and you can't mess that up. So I think that's one of the risk impacts that people really pay attention to. And again, from a budgeting perspective, it really matters. And again, like regardless of sort of where you sit in federal or state or local agencies, there are those compliance imperatives and mandates. And I think threat intelligence really does help you achieve where you have gaps. It really does help you understand where those gaps are.
Well, one gap is in talent and the whole hiring process. I did an interview last week with Workday, and we spent a half hour just on understanding the the process behind trying to hire people and understand things, and even trying to hire someone. Can an HR person know what questions to ask during an interview to hire someone that can understand what a threat is, what it isn't? And so there are people that have weak skills in AI, we know that, and even cyber threat intelligence. And so how does your product help with that? I mean, does it help alleviate some of those training issues?
So probably less on the training, but I will say intelligence has become incredibly important when thinking about insider threats and insider risk. For example, North Korea and the DPRK has been exceedingly successful at infiltrating organizations, sometimes through contractors, sometimes directly through the organization themselves. I think we have an enormous amount of visibility and telemetry into how North Korea is operating and how they're able to secure these jobs. And it's really quite remarkable. I think UN estimates are actually putting it around. We think there's maybe 50,000 actual individuals that are involved in trying to secure jobs in various Western organizations, and for the federal government that may come through contractors. So thinking about insider risk, thinking about how you advise HR groups, even on interviewing, right? If you're going to do virtual interviews, how are you doing that in a way that you have confidence that you're actually talking to the correct human on the other side of that? And I know we've seen in the financial services sector, a lot of them are now requiring all candidates to come in person.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, they just can't solve for it, right, in a virtual world. So I think that's where intelligence can be extremely helpful.
I was talking to a guy, and he told me that AI tools are like tomatoes, they go bad fast, and they can change all the time. And so if you're in an environment that has multiple types of AI tools that are looking at databases, you're expected to do a threat detection analysis on that. I mean, you're thrown into people just buying tools off the shelf, throwing them in there. You've got new vendors coming in. I mean, this is not a position I'd want to be in threat detecting, because it may be that a tool that someone's adapting is obfuscating a risk.
Yeah, yeah. It's a really interesting time we're in right now. I actually think that humans are so important for their judgment right now, and being able to make decisions. And there's obviously a lot of workflows that we're wanting to move into the AI space, and obviously there's efficiencies to be gained. But from multiple angles here, number one, the judgment is really important in terms of being the co-pilot for AI. But number two, I also think that even in the current environment in which there's massive investing going into AI, I think there may be some rotation back to the middle on some of this, because it's very expensive, and the token utilization, I think is skyrocketing, and the costs with that are also skyrocketing. And so I think CFOs everywhere are going to be asking for a deeper, more articulate sort of reasoning around our ROI, for the token spend. And I think, there's going to be probably some, you know, real searching on, for these roles, can we actually use AI for it? Or, do we need a human? Purely from, a judgment perspective, but also from a cost perspective, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out because tokens are not cheap and we're using a lot of them everywhere. So I think, CFOs are going to become a lot more involved in understanding, how things get built and again, what the ROI is on that.
I asked you a generic question about Mythos earlier. I'm going to ask another generic kind of a insider baseball question. I have read that every frontier LLM has been attacked and poisoned, and they've been able to attack it. Have you seen that? Is that really just a myth? Is that a myth? Is that just a statement, a provocative statement of, have you had any experience in that and seeing these just kind of routinely get attacked and maybe manipulating training data or manipulating the actual data for the LLM itself?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have direct hands-on keyboard experience with Mythos specifically, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that every model is susceptible to attack.
Ah,
And I think every model, if you have time and you have some resources, there's no doubt, right, that every single model is susceptible to different kinds of attacks, and we're even seeing some of the criminal space move into this because a lot of what different criminal groups do is try to redirect web traffic to, various websites that they own to try and push some sort of malicious payload onto users' machines, right? And so as search migrates away from sort of traditional search engines to LLMs, you're seeing a lot more interest from criminal groups in determining how they can inject their websites as, preferred destinations into these LLMs, right? So that, you have these LLMs recommending malicious websites to their users, right? And there's always a sort of criminal R&D going into that. And then, of course, you have plenty of state-sponsored actors and actor groups that are demonstrably making use of these capabilities all over the place. So I think, that's again just the new world that we live in, and you have to expect that regardless of what the model is, whether it's older or newer, adversaries are absolutely using it, and that will be the scenario for the foreseeable future.
I've got another funny, maybe 40,000-foot question here. When I look at years ago, I used to work with software developers. We'd always go to a whiteboard and test these things out. So if I had you and me in a room had a whiteboard, we would probably look at the DHS, DoD, the intelligence community, civilian agencies, and so who owns threat intelligence in the federal government? I mean, I don't want to get into politics here because it's a charged area, but just structurally, it seems that there's overlapping authorities, and this could cause friction, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a somewhat consistent issue there that's been there for a while, just in that it's a very large domain, and to your point, you do have a lot of agencies that are involved in that. I think the NSA just put out a really good guide on AI a couple of days ago, I believe. Obviously, and I think they co-wrote it with CISA, which is great to see. And I think there were some other logos in the PDF there on sort of some best practices, which was great to see. I think there's a lot of different models out there sort of globally on what good cooperation looks like. But I think the important piece, as always, is that there's some private sector input as well. I think the private sector has a lot to offer, and I think the collaboration and the partnership between these federal agencies and the private sector has really provided a lot of value in the past, and I think we need to continue to invest in that.
Earlier, I talked about the 500-pound elephant in the room being Mythos, and now another 500-pound elephant in the room, and this is something that's kind of more sensitive, is sharing information about maybe an agency being attacked. Now, on the one hand, from the political point of view, they would encourage that. Now, on the other hand, you may be penalized for, hey, Levi, you had a gap in that and you let a malicious actor in. And so the sharing data I think it's difficult for humans to do this. in second grade and in the federal government. So how do you share exploits carefully?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge topic. I think, there's a recognition that, sharing is crucial. I'll tell you, most of the sharing that happens informally between individuals where there's a trust relationship. I think it's very difficult, and this is true, in the private sector as well. There are plenty of attorneys in all of these organizations, right? And they're there to help manage risk. And sometimes it is difficult to share things because there's penalties or the perception of penalties. And so I think, there's a role for Congress to play here in terms of creating the carrots that need to be there, right, to incentivize the sharing, from public to public and private and so forth. I don't think there's enough carrots right now. And I think, it's not unreasonable for organizations to be, super cautious about sharing because they're sort of unsure about the downstream impacts to themselves and their organization. So I think it's really time for some new legislation that creates those carrots and helps incentivize sharing because there's a lot of goodness that will come out of that.
Final question is the old management question. If you can measure it, you can manage it. So what about ROI? And how would you measure the efficacy of a threat detection company like yourself?
Yeah, so again, I mean, the application of intelligence really needs to be twofold. And I think it's a little bit tricky sometimes to measure decision advantage, but I do think where organizations are creating intelligence reporting, it's really helpful to get a feedback loop going with whoever's consuming those reports to understand how those reports are impacting decisions. I think that's really important. And sometimes it's difficult to get that feedback loop going, and it's really incumbent on senior leaders to take the time to provide that feedback. But then on the security side, sort of operational security, intelligence needs to plug in a whole bunch of areas. So everything from vulnerability management to external attack surface to security operations and incident response. Digital risk protection. There's all kinds of areas that intelligence plugs into in very crunchy ways, and each one of those domains, has their own metrics for how they're measuring, quantifying success. And it is really important that as you apply intelligence and you help automate intelligence into those security verticals, that you are paying attention to each of the metrics, within those security verticals to ensure that you are getting the value and you are seeing the security outcomes improving. So important.
Yeah. I think that'd be the first question. Maybe that should have been the first question I asked in the interview instead of the mythos question. So if people are interested in more information on Recorded Future, where could they go? I guess the URL is just recordedfuture.com, huh?
That's it, recordedfuture.com.
And do they have a federal page there or any kind of white papers to download or?
Yeah, we have a ton of research, ton of white papers, and I don't have the link specifically, but if they hit the homepage, they should be able to get there. And we're obviously posting research all the time out of Insight Group, which is our threat research team as well. Mm-hmm. So great. You can find a lot of really valuable content there.
Great. Thanks a lot. This has been a fun interview. Thank you very much. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Levi Gundert, Chief Security and Intelligence Officer at Recorded Future.
Excellent. Thanks, John.